West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The Justice Department's investigation into former President Trump's handling of documents appears to be far from over. Just this week, the Trump legal team turned over even more materials with classified markings, along with a laptop. They also handed over an empty folder marked classified evening briefing. And joining us now is one of former President Trump's attorneys, Tim Parlatore. All right, to be clear, the former president has a lot of legal issues, but you specifically represent him in the special counsel's investigations into January 6th and Mar-a-Lago.
Yes.
All right, as you just heard, CNN and other outlets reporting that you handed over additional materials, pages with classified markings, a laptop, and a thumb drive over to investigators. Tim, Trump has been out of office for 2 years. Why do classified materials keep showing up?
You know, what has happened here that you've seen here and also in the Biden and Pence investigations is that the White House does not have proper procedures for handling classified information. And these documents, when they get packed up and sent out when people leave office, they do keep showing up, if you will. We conducted a search back in December, which is where we found these documents. We turned them over immediately. These were not turned over last week, although the DOJ leaked it last week. This was turned over back in December. And so we have gone through, we've tried to work with the DOJ, we've tried to do searches of all the relevant places, and anytime we found anything, we've immediately turned it over.
And as we understand it, the laptop that was handed over, it had scanned copies of some of the pages that were handed over. We learned that this laptop belonged to an aide from the Save America PAC. So why would someone from a PAC have access to classified materials?
She was working as an aide to the president, and this is a box that had all of his daily schedules from his time in office. And she scanned all of those as part of being available for future speeches or biographies or things like that. And after we did the search in December, and we found that within this box of thousands, that there were a couple of pages that had a little marking at the bottom, which we turned over. After that, we found out that she had scanned the box so that it would be digitized. She had no idea that there was any classification markings on anything. And as soon as we found out about that, we called up DOJ to let them know and immediately provided them access to it.
Now, you also turned over an empty folder marked classified to investigators. Where was this folder and why was it turned over?
The folder is kind of one of the more humorous aspects of this whole thing. This is not a classified folder. This is a folder that when my team went through and searched and they wrote up their report, which we turned over to DOJ, they saw it's a folder, a manila folder that says classified evening summary on it. And it was in the president's bedroom. He has one of those landline telephones next to his bed, and it has a blue light on it, and it keeps him up at night. So he took the manila folder and he put it over it so that it would keep the light down so he could sleep at night. And it's just this folder. It says classified evening summary on it. It is not a classification marking. It's not anything that is controlled in any way. There's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing in it. And when DOJ found out about it, they went crazy. And they actually gave me a subpoena to say, give us over this empty folder that means nothing.
How did they find out about a folder on his bed table?
We put it in our report. When we did all of our searches, we wrote up reports on everywhere we searched, everywhere we looked, anything we found, where we found it, and we gave that to them because everything that we've done as part of that search has been in the spirit of full cooperation and compliance. And when they read that and they saw, oh, there's this folder here that is so far outside of the scope of the subpoena or anything else, they demanded it back. And so now the president has to find a different way to keep the blue light out of his lies.
I'm sure he has other options, but correct me if I'm wrong. There's also a similar folder on display at the Trump Tower bar. Yeah. He is under criminal investigation for potentially mishandling classified materials. I mean, doesn't the use of these folders suggest somewhat of a flippant attitude towards classified materials?
Not at all. Not at all. These are folders that he was given during his time in office. He didn't keep the contents of the folder, but the folder itself was interesting. So he did keep a copy, some of the folders. He put one on display at the 45 bar. He put one on his phone down in Mar-a-Lago. When we went through the boxes at the National Archives, we found a few more of them there. It's essentially a piece of stationery. It doesn't actually contain anything controlled or anything really that's a problem.
Well, he's obviously running for president. Again, you keep uncovering these classified documents outside of the settings in which they belong. What do you say to people who believe that he shouldn't be trusted with the nation's secrets?
Nothing that we have found has any implications on him personally. Everything that we have found has been consistent with what I've been saying from the beginning, which is the White House, across administrations, their handling of classified documents is not the same as how the intelligence agencies handle it or the military handles it. And so documents are not controlled in the White House across administrations. When people leave the White House and GSA packs everything up, they get mixed in, as we've seen with President Trump, with President Biden, with Vice President Pence. And really, what I say here is President Trump, this doesn't have anything to do with him. This has to do with White House procedures, which is one of the reasons why I say DOJ should get out of this, and they should instead do a review of what the procedures are in the White House, and then legislate a change on how future White House administrations handle documents. Because that would solve the problem.
One big difference between your client and the other two folks that you mentioned is the fact that once this issue was raised, your client did not automatically make an effort to turn over everything. It's taken a while, things are still being handed over, and it's not just potentially mishandling classified information. Your client is also under investigation for a possible obstruction.
I would disagree with that because...
That he's under investigation?
Well, no, not that, but that he didn't try to cooperate. From the beginning, he has tried to cooperate. In fact, he had a meeting with the members of DOJ where he said, if there's anything else you need, let us know. DOJ has taken a position of, really an adversarial position on this, where as much as we want to cooperate with them, they would rather make this into an adversarial fight and try to make it into a criminal case. Had they handled it appropriately from the beginning, agreed to work with us, work towards making sure that we just get the documents and everything is, put back into its place, this all would have been avoided. A lot of what you have here is an appearance of noncompliance, which is created by DOJ in the manner in which they have handled this.
Are you still searching for documents classified with classified markings?
Not at this time, no. We have completed our searches. We've given up our full reports to DOJ. They've seen everything. This latest leak from this past week is really from stuff that happened back in December.
And has the special counsel expressed any interest in speaking with your client?
Not to me.
If he did, if Jack Smith is interested in asking your client questions, would you allow him to do that?
I would certainly consider it, but I'd like to talk to Jack Smith himself first.
You haven't talked to Jack Smith yet?
No, but I'd like to.
Okay. Former Vice President Mike Pence, as you know, was recently subpoenaed in the January 6th investigation. Do you expect to assert privilege to block some of that testimony?
So, as with any witness that goes before the grand jury, we have been instructing them to preserve the privilege. So, any question that they're asked that doesn't call for a privileged answer, they should answer. Any question that they're asked that calls for something that is protected by privilege, either executive, attorney-client, or otherwise, they should assert that privilege at that time. They don't give us a list of questions ahead of time. They assert the privilege, and then after they're done testifying, then it's up to DOJ to decide whether they want to file a motion to compel or not. And so really, all we know is they want to bring people in, and if they're not going to give us a list of questions so that we can figure it out exactly, we tell them, okay, assert privilege to everything, because the reality is you don't want to create a precedent where DOJ can just run roughshod over the privilege because it's a new administration. So we instruct them, they assert, and then DOJ decides whether they want to file a motion to compel.
So it sounds like you will likely assert privilege over the Mike Pence testimony.
Every witness that goes into the grand jury that has information that's potentially privileged, we tell them to assert the privilege.
And that would also apply to Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor.
Every witness that goes in.
And then, as you saw this week, one additional classified document was found during a search of former Vice President Mike Pence's house. Do you think a special counsel should be appointed to look into his case?
I don't. I don't think that there should be special counsels appointed to look at any classified document cases. I think that that is a business that DOJ needs to be put on the bench for, and instead the Office of the Director of National Intelligence should get into it, and they should do an administrative classified document spillage investigation. They should provide, to all former residents of the White House, they should provide them all amnesty. That way they can get full cooperation from everybody and figure out really what is going on with the White House document handling procedures so that they can fix it. When you have DOJ go into these things, they are automatically going in with all the criminal processes and trying to threaten people to go to jail over something that really is a procedural failure and an institutional procedural failure that has nothing to do with Mike Pence, Donald Trump, or quite frankly, Joe Biden.
It is Monday, the 13th of February of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because you know what we do with what's left over from the weekend. Oh, yes, you do. Hey there, here we are. Survived another perilous weekend. You don't want to be taking any hot air balloon rides for Valentine's Day. No, not now. Jeez. Certainly, you don't want to be getting up to 20,000 feet. If you were getting up to 20,000 feet, you would need oxygen and maybe a coat. Maybe. So don't be floating up that high. And whatever is up there, are they balloons? Is it an invasion from another world? Yeah, I don't know. Those are the real illegal aliens. How dare you come here? You think you just come into our world? Yeah, take me to your leader. That would be scary, huh? Maybe we are in the midst of starting or furthering an intergalactic war. The MAGA, I keep calling them MAGA Nazis, and I know that's rather strong language, but they are. But anyway, these people that they call themselves Republicans going on the weekend shows, you can't call them just the Sunday shows anymore. It's the weekend shows. Just out there, on the one hand, they're upset because Joe didn't shoot anything down. He just let it go across the country so they could reverse engineer it and maybe find out that we owe China a bunch of money and that we're invested in the companies that built the components of these machines. And we don't want to get caught. That's what it sounded like to me. And now they're whining that he's shooting them out of the sky. He's trying to start World War III. Well, do we call it Joe Biden derangement syndrome? That their hate is just so all-consuming that they can't see reason? I love how they turn that around on us. I'll get to Kellyanne Conway in just a moment because she kind of pissed me off too. But anyway, the main idea or thrust behind all of the arguments, regardless whether he is or is not, he being Joe Biden, is or not shooting these objects out of the sky fast enough or too fast, is that by and large, quite a few of these, now I figure they get all their talking points from like an ALEC talking point in a box type of format. Sure sounds like it, because if you watch the talk shows, not just one, but if you watch the talk shows, they have the same points. And sometimes like a script. And part of that script was that I wish we had leaders and presidents who were trigger happy. Okay, that says it all right there, because that kind of idea perfectly explains why black kids get killed knocking on someone's door asking for help. I'm just saying. Trigger happy. They want them to be trigger happy. Okay. You know, there were several Twilight Zone episodes addressing this particular kind of knee-jerk reaction that causes violence and perpetuates death upon innocence. Not only the innocent, but innocence itself. Gotta get rid of it. Only cynicism shall survive in this world. Which reminds me, there's a big push to bring back child labor. Just give me a break. And they're going to use that as an excuse because a woman's right to choose is impacting the job market. You're a commie. You're trying to keep us from being able to enslave people to their desks. Well, little kids won't be working at desks. They're going to be putting their little hands into places and machinery that we adults aren't able to. And what's cheaper? Little kids or robots? I thought robots were supposed to be kicking us out. Now we got like a freaking 7-year-old taking over your job. Don't need a high school diploma. Apparently you don't even need to get into first grade. All right. Well, there's child soldiers. Why shouldn't children be able to work? God. This is like going backwards, folks. I don't get it. Cylindrical, unidentified objects flying in the sky. Earthquakes, pestilence, just any number of things. I would think that we would not want to devolve into chaos while the chaos is chaotic around us. But that's because, once again, I'm a romantic. Yeah, well, apparently I guess we must prepare for the chaos. As if we haven't already after all these years. Well, you know, we have a curated show for you. Should I speak about the... I was going to speak about a little bit about the Super Bowl, but I mentioned Kellyanne Conway. Pulling a Goebbels, you know, it's like total projecting with these people about extremists and people who are just divisive, and you know, Joe promised to bring America together and it's not happening. You know, they said the same thing about Obama, that Obama went out there and said, you know, I really want to unify America, and the Nazi white supremacists out there said, no way, we're not going to allow that, and then they blamed Obama for it. He couldn't convince we racists. They would never say we, they would say us racists. He couldn't convince us to not be racist. So therefore he broke a campaign promise. How can you trust him? Just give me a break. And apparently enough people fall for it because the media puts that out there as if that's a perfectly logical explanation for why things are the way they are. Yikes. Okay. And the Super Bowl. What do I say about the Super Bowl other than the Jesus Gets Us advertisements? Funded by Hobby Lobby, by the way, the right-wing organization, trying to take away a woman's right to choose because apparently now Since states are trying to bring back child labor, a woman's right to choose could drastically impact an employer's ability to hire someone. Okay. All right. Well, that's where we are. And anyway, the Jesus Gets Us is a cookbook. All right. I like how they come out and say, oh, we have all this chaos around us. We should love each other anyway, because that's what Jesus would want us to do. I mean, Jesus was with the poor people, and Jesus was with the marginalized people, and Jesus gets us. Yeah, that's what they say in the commercial. And then you find out it's Hobby Lobby behind it. And I got to say, Hobby Lobby, the people that are running Hobby Lobby ran around and got religious artifacts, just like the rich industrialist in the Indiana Jones movie. And so did the Nazis, because they thought it imbued them with some sort of, spiritual power, because they have these artifacts. Oh, I got the wisp of hair from, Jesus, and it turns out to be a camel. But, they don't care. Whatever meaning you assign it to. I've got the Shroud of Turin here. Well, that's great, Feel sorry for the family that you stole that from. Honor the dead. Anyway, Hobby Lobby. These rich, I gotta say, Nazis. Okay, Burgermeisters. Nazis would have never been able to do what they did without the Burgermeisters and industry. The oligarchs of the day. Wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And they did. And here we are now in Hobby Lobby, going around getting these religious artifacts, funding efforts to take away basically constitutional rights all across the board. It's not just a woman's right to choose. It's everything. You have to learn our brand of Christianity. You can't learn about anything else. The private, getting rid of public education, etc., etc., etc. That's why I say that the Jesus Gets Us is a cookbook. Because they have all these niceties, all these great platitudes about what Jesus is. And, the Jesus story is a very profound story. Let's be clear. Okay? And they use that. Get us all soft and fattened up. And then they take us to another world. Yeah, they take us to another world, all right. Of child labor. Maybe even being tied into a little pod so they can run their society. Virtual and otherwise. Okay. I got that off my chest. Super Bowl. It was okay game. And some people might complain that at the very end it got sort of a technical win. Well, grab somebody around the waist and sometimes you're going to get called for it. They never call that late in the game. I don't know. Is time involved within, that determines whether an infraction is an infraction or not? It just is what it is. And I have no proverbial dog in the game. I didn't. Some people don't like Philadelphia and some people don't like Kansas City. And, some people do. For both of them. It was an exciting game nonetheless. And Jesus Gets Us is a cookbook. And I don't know. Oh, Rihanna. Rihanna was not satanic. She was pregnant. Okay? It wasn't anything Nick Adams about, nodding towards Satan. To me, it looked like a gender reveal. To me, yeah, a big old gender reveal spectacle. With fireworks, too. Okay, what do we have in store for you here today in this fantastic 13th of February? Oh, my gosh. Well, here it is, River City Hash Mondays, and a Trump lawyer wanted to say the dog ate the classified material in that empty folder on Trump's nightstand that was hiding the blue light. But Trump hates dogs, so you can't use that excuse. On the rest of the menu, the oldest schoolhouse for black children in the U.S. has been moved to a museum. GOP election tactics come as no surprise to Wisconsin's black voters, and the Kansas GOP, GOP, picked an election conspiracy promoter as its new leader. It's been going around, like a contagion. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen ordered the shutdown of one of the country's last independent news outlets. And Turkey ordered the arrest of 113 contractors over thousands of collapsed buildings in the catastrophic earthquake there. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. And yes, we still have a chat room. Remember those? We have one. And Kelly Lincoln takes care of that chat room as our monitor. So thank you, Kelly, for doing so, and so much more. If you out there in radio listening land would look across the page there at near the bottom of our homepage, at netrootsradio.com. You'll then notice the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would really help if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, thus becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really does, in all seriousness, help us put a big dent in the bills that we pay to keep this powerhouse of resistance resisting as the founders originally intended so many years ago. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as those founders originally intended so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter and Mastodon, and also over there at Spoutable too, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those for us, so thanks, Tom. You can follow me on Twitter, and I suggest you do also. Follow Netroots Radio. We need to up those follow totals. Yes, here we are. And but if you follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, also on Mastodon and Spoutable at Justice Putnam, you will be able to quickly link up to the show notes and links diary that I post on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and that way you can read the full article at your leisurely pace and get the full nuance of it, or lack thereof. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts, please do, by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine River City Hash Mondays, though when we get to the weather, I'll get into more detail, but we're under a winter weather advisory, and it has now been upgraded to a storm watch, so we're expecting a bit of snow, as we should. Anyway, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on River City Hash Mondays is by Ben Finley out of the Associated Press. A building believed to be the oldest surviving schoolhouse for black children in the United States was hoisted onto a flatbed truck and moved a half-mile on Friday to Colonial Williamsburg, a Virginia museum that continues to expand its emphasis on African American history, apparently not allowed in Florida. Built 25 years before the American Revolution, the original structure stood near the college campus of William and Mary. The Pinewood building held as many as 30 students at a time, some of them free black children studying alongside the enslaved. Hundreds of people lined the streets to celebrate its slow-speed trip into the heart of the Living History Museum, which tells the story of Virginia's colonial capital through interpreters and restored buildings. For historians and descendants alike, the Bray School contradicts the belief that all enslaved Americans were uneducated, but the school's faith-based curriculum, created by an English charity, also justified slavery and encouraged students to accept their fate as God's plan. Religion was at the heart of the school, and it was not a gospel of abolition, said Maureen Elgerson Lee, director of William and Mary's Bray School Lab. There was this need to proselytize and to bring salvation while still not doing anything to destabilize the institution of slavery, Lee said. Save the soul, but continue to enslave the body. It was here versus the hereafter. It was a brand of duplicity that fit easily into the larger contradictions of the country's founding, when the democracy being forged explicitly denied rights and freedoms to many of its people. Williamsburg is less than 10 miles from Jamestown, which England established in 1607. The colony was supplied with enslaved Africans for labor just a dozen years later. A century and a half after that, black people, most of them still enslaved, represented just over half of Williamsburg's 2,000 people. The Bray School was established in 1760 at the recommendation of Benjamin Franklin, chairman of a London-based Anglican charity named after philanthropist Reverend Thomas Bray. The charity also set up schools in other cities, including New York and Philadelphia. The curriculum ranged from spellers to the Book of Common Prayer, but even within the school's paternalistic framework, the education could still be empowering, perhaps even subversive. I was going through a facsimile of one of the books, and there are words like liberty, Lee said. What did learning those words do to expand these children's sense of themselves, their sense of the world? Isaac B., a Bray School student, would run away as an adult from a slave owner named Louis Burwell. An ad that Burwell placed in the Virginia Gazette in 1774 offered a cash bounty for his return and warned that B could read. The white teacher, a widow named Ann Wager, lived upstairs at the school and taught an estimated 300 and 400 students whose ages ranged from 3 to 10, according to surviving records. The Williams Bray School operated until 1774. Only Philadelphia's reopened after the Revolutionary War. The structure became a private home for many years before it was incorporated into William and Mary's campus. The former schoolhouse eventually was moved from its original spot to make way for a dormitory. The original structure had 1.5 stories with a small upstairs. It was expanded over the years to include 2 full stories and was last used as an office for ROTC, the college program that prepares military officers. Harm Van Weesen of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Recent revelations about Republican election strategies targeting minority communities in Wisconsin's biggest city, came as no surprise to many black voters. A Wisconsin election commissioner bragged about low turnout in predominantly black and Latino neighborhoods during last year's elections. Weeks later, an audio recording surfaced that showed then-President Donald Trump's Wisconsin campaign team laughing behind closed doors about efforts to reach black voters in 2020. Many people who voted this past week in the state's primary election said they had long felt targeted by Republicans. The difference now is the public display of strategies that are at best ignore the priorities of black voters and at worst actively look to keep them from voting. It's a plan that they devised and carried out with quite a lot of precision, said lifelong resident Dwayne Walls, age 63. It's a repeatable pattern that's going to continue to happen over and over as long as they have that plausible deniability and as long as they have the power in Madison, which is, of course, the state capital. Walls and other black voters said they are tired of the countless hurdles that disproportionately try to keep them from being heard at the ballot box. Voters said their experiences with the GOP have been voices to silence, not to win over. The Republican Party needs a lot of work. All of them need to actually step into our shoes, go into our neighborhoods, work our jobs, do the things that we're doing on a daily basis, and see how they feel about what's going on once they experience it, said Valeria Gray, age 59. She described the relationship between Milwaukee and much of the rest of the state as one divided by race. Voting rights advocates for years have accused Wisconsin Republicans of pushing policies to suppress voters of color and lower-income voters. Many such policies centered on the Democratic stronghold of Milwaukee, home to nearly 70% of Wisconsin's black population. Those claims were reinforced by an email sent to about 1,700 people in December from Bob Spindell, a Republican member of the Wisconsin Election Commission. He said Republicans can be especially proud of depressed midterm voter turnout in predominantly black and Latino neighborhoods in Milwaukee, the heavily Democratic city. Spindell later said his email was meant to convey the steps Republicans took to counter Democratic messaging in the city. John Hanna of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Republicans on Saturday narrowly picked an activist who has promoted unfounded election conspiracies and promised a shakeup to lead the Kansas GOP for the next 2 years, following weeks of infighting that mirrors the acrimony in the party across the U.S. Within 30 minutes of the change in the Kansas Republican Party's leadership, its state committee reviewed a resolution demanding that the House impeach President Joe Biden for tyranny over comments he and his aides made in the summer of 2021, decrying misinformation about coronavirus vaccines spreading within the GOP. The committee tabled the resolution until its next meeting. The Kansas State Committee elected Mike Brown, who has long been active in the GOP in the Kansas City area, as its new chair through the 2024 elections. The vote came 3 months after Democratic Governor Laura Kelly narrowly won re-election and the only Democrat in the state's congressional delegation, U.S. Representative Sharice Davids, won another term handily in her Kansas City area district, and apparently that's a step too far for the Kansas Repugs, in this reporter's opinion. Back to the article. The Kansas Party's retiring chair, Mike Knuckleman, sounds like he knuckled under, hardy har har, and its 2 other Republican National Committee members supported RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel when she won re-election last month, but Brown called on McDaniel to resign in December, and he said Saturday that the national GOP is seeing an internal uprising from members still upset over COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. This is what they are hanging their proverbial hat on. Can you believe this? Last year, Brown ran unsuccessfully for the GOP nomination for Kansas Secretary of State. Both he and his opponent, Helen Van Etten, a longtime Topeka activist and former RNC member, promised to revive the Kansas Party. But Brown asked fellow Republicans whether they were happy with the results of the past 2 governor's races won by Kelly and David's election victories. The vote, with Brown prevailing at 90 to 88, occurred against the backdrop of the GOP's unexpectedly poor showing in the 2022 midterms, when it won fewer than expected U.S. House seats and failed to recapture a U.S. Senate majority. Well, it only seems unexpected if you weren't really looking at what was going on. People are fed up with this Nazi takeover of the United States of America, and it seems to have taken over one party locally and on the state and obviously the federal level. Dare we allow it to continue? No, we got to stand up against it. Well, that's enough of that rant. What we need to do now is get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Twistin' the Night Away. Director-writer M. Night Shyamalan has had a career of twists and turns both in general and for me personally. His first 2 big films, The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, were notable for having surprising twists at their ends. Well, not so much twists as big reveals. But then Shyamalan made his smartest twist. He stopped writing reveals. Because seriously, who can keep that up? Especially with people now intently looking for the twist. Turns out what people like less than a weak twist is you not doing one at all, and I guess cheating them of the chance to figure you out and feel superior, whatever. People were upset. There was so much knee-jerk anti-Shyamalan fervor, I was surprised he kept getting greenlit. Meanwhile, I still loved his films. But then came another twist. Having made thrillers like a scion of Hitchcock and De Palma, Shyamalan nudged his work over into horror, and I don't like horror. I just don't. So I lost one of my favorite filmmakers. So, now here's Knock at the Cabin, my first Shyamalan film in years, and it has so many of the qualities that I loved in his earlier works. It's nicely written, it's solidly paced, he crafts scenes of emotional intimacy extremely well, along with capturing really great earnest performances from his actors, a killer 1-2 punch of skills. And yet, the movie uses a lot of the structure and filmic language of horror. I mean, for all that Knock at the Cabin examines the thin line between empathy and self-sacrifice, a line I didn't know existed, it remains, at its core, a home invasion thriller in what I call the ritual killing genre. We meet some people, get to know them, and then watch them die. Slasher films, torture porn, disaster movies, why do we make films like these? Why do we watch them? If you like them, great. Go see Knock at the Cabin. Dave Bautista's casting is inspired. I'll be rewatching Lady in the Water. And yes, I know you hated that one. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work. Sorry, I'm late. Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
When you learned about the killing of Tyre Nichols, were you appalled? And I have a follow-up question.
I'm Lily Ledbetter, and this is a Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
And the follow-up question is, were you surprised? Tyre Nichols died at the hands of members of the Scorpion unit of the Memphis Police Department. Scorpion, disbanded by the Memphis police chief after Tyre Nichols was killed, was formed in November 2021, a specialized squad of some 40 officers mandated to bring down violent crime. There now are many credible reports that Scorpion was operating on its own terms, with residents testifying to Scorpion's repeated acts of physical intimidation and harassment. Young black men were targeted. The city is 65% black, yet according to the police department's own data, 90% of the people arrested by Scorpion were black. And black residents in Memphis were 3 times more likely than whites to be subjected to physical force by the police. 3 times as likely. This data predating the creation of Scorpion. Indeed, it goes back 7 years. A Scorpion tactic. Drive up to people on the street, jump out of the cruiser or unmarked car, and engage in the vehicular equivalent of stop and frisk. It is not clear how many Scorpion members operated with these tactics, but clearly some did. Which raises, yet again, the perennial question, who will police the police?
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. What labor union would you say has the coolest name? The Sons of Vulcan would most certainly have to be in the running. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day the Sons of Vulcan ended their 8-month strike and won a union contract. The Vulcans were skilled steelworkers. Many were immigrants from England, Scotland, and Wales. They worked at puddling, the process by which carbon was burnt off of molten iron in order to form steel. It was tough work that required physical strength, skill, and experience. The Vulcans first formed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1858. A skilled trade union, only puddlers were eligible to join. They called their locals forges. They took their name, Vulcan, from the Roman god of fire and volcanoes. With the ongoing Civil War, the demand for steel grew. The work of the Vulcans was vital to the Union's war effort. But as the Civil War drew to a close, puddlers' wages were threatened. The Vulcans declared a national strike. The strike wore on for 8 months. Finally, the industry leaders agreed to the workers' demands. The Vulcans won wage increases tied to industry profits as well as union recognition. With this victory, the Vulcans' membership grew. By 1873, the number of Vulcans had topped 3,000 members. Unfortunately, that year saw a major economic panic sweep across the United States. The economic crisis took a toll on union membership. Another downfall of the union was their policy not to admit black members. This meant that employers could hire black labor in an effort to undermine the union. By 1876, the Vulcans had merged with other steel unions to form the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 35 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting to be considerably cooler than what we were over the weekend. Over the weekend, we were bumping around 60, a little bit above, a little bit below. It was quite balmy, quite nice. Only expecting a high of 45 degrees today, and we are under foggy conditions and a winter storm warning, as I alluded to earlier. Cloudy this morning with showers during the late morning and afternoon. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like we're going to get about a quarter inch of rain during the day. And then rain and snow this evening, becoming all snow overnight. Lows in the upper 20s. Winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And we're looking to get about a half inch of snow piling up. And then rain and snow tomorrow, tapering off in the morning. Decreasing cloudiness in the afternoon with highs in the upper 30s, low 40s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And we're looking at snow accumulations of around an inch to 2 inches. And that's for tomorrow. Pollen is still rated as none right here in the town of Rogue River itself. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the good range at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady. It is falling at 30.11 inches. Visibility is at 1.5 miles, and relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 55 degrees and sunny. Paris is 55 degrees and sunny. Rome is 57 and sunny. Kyiv is 36 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 31 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 68 with light rain. Tokyo is 42 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 66 degrees with showers in the vicinity. San Francisco, California is 49 degrees with heavy fog and a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny, and also with a small craft advisory, so do take care. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen ordered the shutdown of one of the last independent local news organizations in the country, saying it had attacked him and his son and hurt the country. The Voice of Democracy, also known as VOD, will no longer have a license to publish or broadcast from 10 a.m. local time today. The Prime Minister ordered Phnom Penh police to keep order but not seize property. He said foreign donors to VOD should take back their money and its staff should find new jobs. Commentators tried to attack me and my son, Hun Manet, Hun Sen wrote. He said a VOD story published earlier this week had hurt the dignity and reputation of the Cambodian government, and he ordered the Ministry of Information to cancel VOD's license. VOD on Wednesday published a story on Cambodia's earthquake aid to Turkey. The story quoted government spokesperson Faye Safan saying the Prime Minister's son and presumed successor, Hun Manet, had signed the aid agreement. Hun Manet is the Joint Chief of Staff and Deputy Commander of the country's armed forces, and signing such an agreement appeared to have overstepped the bounds of his position. Hun Sen, one of the longest-serving dictators on whose watch political rivals have been jailed and exiled, critical media outlets shuttered and civil dissent crushed, demanded a public apology. The NGO that runs VOD, the Cambodian Center for Independent Media, sent a letter to Hun Sen's cabinet saying it was sorry for any confusion it may have caused, and explaining that voted quoted government spokesperson Faye Safan, and Hun Sen said, well, that response was unacceptable. The paper had a reputation for breaking news on tough issues and was shut months ahead of the last general election in 2018. The next general election is due to be held in July.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Darren Butler of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Turkey vowed to investigate thoroughly anyone suspected of responsibility for the collapse of buildings in the country's devastating earthquakes nearly 1 week ago, and has already ordered the detention of 113 suspects. Vice President Fuat Oktay said overnight that 131 suspects had so far been identified as responsible for the collapse of some thousands of the buildings flattened in the 10 provinces affected by the tremors early last Monday. Detention orders have been issued to 113 of them, Oktay told reporters. We will follow this up meticulously until the necessary judicial process is concluded, especially for buildings that suffered heavy damage and buildings that caused deaths and injuries. He said the Justice Ministry had already established earthquake crimes investigation bureaus in the quake zone provinces to investigate those deaths and injuries. Environment Minister Murat Kurum said that 24,921 buildings across the region had collapsed or were heavily damaged in the quake. Rescuers were still looking for survivors in the earthquake rubble 6 days after the disaster, which hit parts of Syria and Turkey. The death toll has exceeded 30,000 and is expected to rise further. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.